London, England, Week 4, 2022 NFL season. Michael McQuaid, Colin Cronin, Brian O'Leary, no Mark Cockerell today. Irish NFL show live from London. How are we doing? Colin, how are you doing?
Very well. Delighted to be back in London. The expanded international series, Michael. 3 games in London, 1 game in Munich, and looking forward to today seeing Justin Jefferson probably more than anything.
I was going to say Justin Herbert for a second there. Justin Jefferson, Andy Dalton playing for the Saints. Brian, the first game I ever went to in the NFL was that infamous overtime game. Were you at that game?
No, I wasn't. I was thinking, Michael, was that Kirk Cousins against Andy Dalton, in fact, in that game.
Washington against Cincinnati.
And here we are back again, and because of injuries to the Saints,
right enough.
with Winston being ruled out this week, you're going to get to see that those 2 quarterbacks play again today, which is a very different feel to that game. Back then, the Bengals were not the Bengals we see today, and Washington have had the struggles. Both quarterbacks, different teams, 2 teams that had a little bit of an up and down start to the season, but still makes for a great game today, and it's great to be back here at the Tottenham Academy with you guys.
Appreciate the support from Tottenham Academy. Appreciate the support from Cassidy Travel, main sponsors of the Irish NFL show. As we get set to make our travels to London, you can check out for all the offers as well in the bio on YouTube. You can get the email address for them. And also, folks, NFL Game Pass, you can watch the game 2:30 p.m. today. The link is in the bio on our YouTube channel. We'll try and get some comments potentially read out, but it's, as you can imagine, it's a bit different than being in the computer room at the house. Colin, before we bring our first guest on, this should be a good game. I mean, even with the backup quarterback for the Saints, both teams need a win. It's important for them any week, but especially such an early start to the season, coming over here week 4. It never used to be this way in terms of coming over here so early.
Yeah, it's obviously very early, and look, both of these teams do need to win, especially the Saints sitting at 1 and 2, but a lot of injuries. So the most perfect stat I think I've ever seen. Kirk Cousins has played one game in London, and he's 500, which is exactly what you expect from Kirk Cousins. It's totally fitting.
It is, and it's exciting, Brad.
It is. We're fortunate this year to have 3 games in London. The Munich game last year, we had just the 2, and the NFL have done their best to make sure we're going to see 3 competitive games. Next week's one could be potentially 2 teams with a winning record, but obviously today that's not the case. Colin was alluded to the Saints having a good start, in terms of the comeback against the Falcons, only to lose to the Bucs and lose to the Panthers. They're finally out of the division. They've had the first 3 weeks of divisional games. Now they go on the road, I suppose, in the sense that they're not the home team today. They are the home team here today, but they are on the road again against the Vikings team that, the Vikings are the team that really causes a lot of different points on our show. When we did our division, the North preview, when we did our season preview, I think you both have both these teams going to the playoffs. In fact, you have the Saints winning the division, but the Vikings, I can't make this Vikings team out because I picked them when they went to Philadelphia in week 2. I felt that we would see Kirk Cousins come on from the week 1 win against the Packers. It didn't materialise. The defence that night wasn't as, when you look upon the reflection of the stats, and it wasn't as bad as it looked, because for large parts of the second half they kept Hurts in check. Last week it looked like the Vikings were gone. There was a 10-point lead for the Lions in the 4th quarter. They managed to come back and win. So they should have the impetus today, pushing on from a really good win last week within the division against the Lions team that have done well this season to make a push and win this game, especially with the injuries in which the Saints have today.
Well, if you're going to Mass this morning or church, please light a candle, because if it rains, we have to go inside. So please do light a candle. We're going to be joined by our first guest in a couple of minutes. We'll be right back as we get set up for that. So we'll see you in a couple of minutes. And thanks for joining us this morning so far, folks. Welcome back into the Irish NFL show. Week 4 of the NFL season. Vikings Saints 2:30 Ireland, UK, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, and if you live in the West Coast, go to bed. It's on at 6:30 in the morning. We are delighted to welcome in a guy that's been on our broadcast previously in different outlets, but now covering the NFL for Pro Football Network, PFN. Arif Hassan. Arif, I can't tell you how excited I am to have you on here. It's fantastic. Welcome in, man.
Thanks for having me.
Talk to us about, and I know you talked to us before about like your career, but you told us off screen there now it's not your first time in London for the NFL.
Yeah, I was here back when the Vikings played the Browns, which was a pretty exciting game. I think it got overshadowed by the very last play. Everson Griffin was on the sack streak, and he hurt his foot at the end of the game. But that was a really exciting experience. I learned a lot about being in London. It's I think that time it was my third or fourth time in Europe, but my first time in London. So I don't know. It's always fun to travel. I love international travel. I love being in London. It's a ton of fun.
Well, we're delighted to welcome you back to the show. And I suppose since you were last on, we've heard a lot about, since Mike Zimmer left, about the toxicity, about the culture of fear. Was that evident when you were covering the team last year? And how different are things now under Kevin O'Connell?
Yeah, it was definitely evident, but it's really difficult to really isolate because it's kind of like, boiling a frog, right? It takes a long time to get it going. And you don't notice all the subtle, small differences when you're in it, when you're watching it every single day. And so, that last year there was definitely a pallor over the team, and so you could tell that there was a problem with the coaching, a problem with team motivation, a problem with the connection that players had with coaches. But it's actually easier to tell now than it was then, just because of how players are acting now. I mean, there's a lot more vibrancy. There's an atmosphere, I think, where people are a little bit more comfortable, and I think the urgency that they have now has a different character to it than the urgency that they had last year.
Arif, there's many a quarterback that divides an opinion in the NFL, but Kirk Cousins is one of them.
He's at the top of the list.
Probably one of the top 5. Certainly on our show, we have very mixed opinions about Kirk Cousins. He's highly one of the most expensive quarterbacks in the league, in terms of kicking the can down the road with contracts and stuff. And obviously, Kevin O'Connell has a relationship with him from his time in Washington. But from a fan's perspective, you get to speak to fans on the ground. Are they enamoured with Kirk Cousins? Do you feel that it's one of those situations where some fans might be glad to see him move on next season if this season didn't materialise? Like, there's a great opportunity for them within the division this year. Do you think Kirk Cousins is the long-term answer?
Yeah, fans are about as divided as I think national commentators are when it comes to Kirk Cousins. Fans of the Vikings will argue every single day, especially on Twitter, I'm sure you'll notice it, about whether or not Kirk Cousins holds back the team, whether or not he helps the team, what he can do to help them, like you said, win the division when there's a unique opportunity this year with how gutted the Packers are in terms of their roster. It seemed very much like that opportunity was going to materialize after week 1, and so I think a lot of their argument died down a little bit, but as the team has gone forward, as they've kind of stumbled a little bit, it's those arguments have resurfaced. I think personally for me, Cousins is the kind of quarterback who, he's a much better than your average quarterback in terms of helping teams win games, but when you add in the cost of that contract and what it means to team building and how exactly they can push forward, he creates I think a limitation. I think that he's a quarterback that if the team is built correctly, you can consistently get to the playoffs, but it's very difficult once you're in the playoffs to win with him.
Awesome. Well, we last spoke to you after the draft, which seems like a lifetime ago now, Arif. And you, like a lot of Vikings fans, were slightly confused by the path in which they took in the draft, going back from 12 to 32. Very similar story in round 2. What has been evident is the team taken to Kevin O'Connell, and has there been anything? I know you've talked about the different sort of attitudes, but has there been anything else that stood out to you, in training camp over the last few weeks leading into the new season?
Yeah, I think that the questions about the draft have, again, like the questions of the team, have resurfaced a little bit because the first 2 picks that they made, Lewis Seen and Andrew Booth, have not contributed for the Vikings, and that's very frustrating. Obviously, with younger players, you kind of expect them to take a little bit more time, but the earlier you pick in the draft, the more you expect them to contribute more immediately, and so those are, I think, pretty fair questions to have. Their next draft pick, Ed Ingram, he has a host of off-field concerns, but also he has not been playing very well on the field. And so from that perspective, the early returns on the draft, who knows what it's going to look like 4 years from now, the early returns on the draft are a little bit disappointing. just in terms of kind of the things that are a little bit different with, how the Vikings team looks overall. It's a little bit easier to tell those differences because those draft picks aren't playing, so you get some of the same players in different positions, and that'll let you kind of take a look at those differences. And some of it's that the offense is, I think, a lot more complex and diverse. It's more interesting to see what that offense is trying to do. They play a lot more with motion. They play a lot more with kind of these illusions that offenses will try to play, and they throw the ball a little bit more. So that's kind of cool. I think on defense, they're still getting their legs under them. It's a defense that struggles a little bit. It's an entirely new system, and it looks a lot different to Vikings fans because it's a 3-4 instead of a 4-3, which is just kind of the number of players that you have up at the line of scrimmage. So we'll kind of see how that shakes out, but it certainly does look a lot different.
I suppose the superstar of this team and the player everyone, I think, today wants to see have a good game is Justin Jefferson. And obviously, week 1 against the Packers, he looked like he was on course for an incredible year. Like he really was a standout. And all of a sudden, week 2, week 3, an enormous drop-off. I think 48 yards week 2, 14 last week.
Correct, yeah.
Have you been surprised that teams have been able to lock him up like that? And how can the Vikings scheme to get him back into games?
I'm a little bit surprised. I think that Jefferson is such a quality receiver that he can overcome kind of a lot of things that teams will throw at him. And that happened last year, and he was able to produce in a pretty big way. Ended up with 1,600 yards, I think, 16, I think. And so it was a little bit surprising, but at the same time, I wasn't shocked that teams would do so much to make sure that he'd be limited. In fact, you take a look back at what the Lions were doing against Justin Jefferson, sometimes they'd have 3 different players on him. And if that's the case, then it falls on the Vikings, not on Jefferson, to punish those teams. And the Vikings did a very poor job until the very end of the game, exploiting kind of the holes that creates, because they do have, pretty high-quality players outside of Justin Jefferson, like Dalvin Cook, like Adam Thielen, like KJ Osborne. And the fact that they weren't using them until late in the game, I think, was a problem. And it's, I think, a strategy that a lot of teams will, continue to pursue until the Vikings can punish them. Because, this isn't new to the Vikings. Back when Stephon Diggs was on the team, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs did a really good job punishing teams for double-teaming Stephon Diggs or double-teaming Adam Thielen, depending on who they wanted to take away. And the Vikings would punish them by throwing to the other guy, and they should do that again. That'll reopen coverages up for Jefferson because they can't give up 200 yards to a different receiver in order to prevent 150 yards from going to Jefferson.
One player that can alleviate the pressure on the quarterback is Dalvin Cook, and Dalvin Cook has had a mixed start this season. Early in the week, we didn't even know whether he'd be here today to play the game, obviously coming off injured last week against the Lions. Madison looks like he's a bit of a star. Do you see similarities in Dallas with Pollard? He doesn't get enough of game ball. Is Madison falling into that? And is Dalvin Cook finding himself getting too many injuries at this stage that he's not progressing to the player in which the Vikings would expect?
Yeah, I think with regards to Alexander Madison, it's to me not quite the same as the Tony Pollard situation. I think the difference between the two is that Dalvin Cook does a much better job getting those giant gains over Madison, whereas Pollard, that's kind of the advantage he has over Ezekiel Elliott, right? And so it is difficult to make a consistent argument that Madison should be getting much more playing time just because of that ceiling that's available to Cook. But that said, I think that you're right that the injury concerns of Dalvin Cook, the reason that he's not here is a shoulder injury. I still don't know if it's the same shoulder injury he suffered over the previous 2 seasons, but I think it is. That shoulder injury, I would have assumed took him out of this game. It sounds like he might actually play. We'll see kind of how much he plays as a result. That is such a big concern that whenever we see Dalvin Cook injured, he plays a lot differently. He plays with a lot less explosiveness. And in the last, I think, 3 fumbles that he's had have all come while he's been injured, right? He was injured in the middle of the play that led to a fumble. And those are concerns that the Vikings need to carry with them. And whether the answer to that is to play Alexander Madison more or to play, the 2 other running backs, Kenny Wangu and Ty Chandler more, I don't know. But certainly they should spread the ball around a little bit more. I mean, he's a remarkable player, Dalvin Cook, but those injuries are such a big problem that it becomes kind of incumbent upon them to find other ways to run the ball.
One last round of questions, Rafe, if you don't mind. I'm actually going to go off script, man. And I'm going to talk about the Mayo curse, which I know you know a lot about. And I was actually explaining this to a few lads in the UK last week, and they thought I was joking. But since we've last spoke, do you think, are you more convinced that the Vikings have a similar curse? Or Are you very much still thinking the same thing? Or
Well, it's been a while since I've talked about the Mayo curse. My recollection is that the curse started because they were driving past a funeral procession.
Yep.
Yeah. And okay, I understand that. I understand why there would be a curse for that. I don't understand what would lead to the Vikings curse specifically. There hasn't been a bunch of great history as to why the curse started. I think some of the greatest stories that you have about sports curses have some sort of story behind them, whether it's like the Bambino curse in baseball or some other kind of, karmic reason that a team wouldn't be able to win. But certainly it does seem like the Vikings are fated to not succeed for whatever reason. And so, if you want to call that a curse, that makes sense to me. But I wish there was a good story to go with it for me to really, truly sell the curse.
there might be in someday. There might be some story to go about soon. Who knows?
Yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably a PhD in the Chargers curse. Somebody needs to look into that.
There you go. Yeah.
I suppose you talked earlier about the change in defensive scheme, but the pass rush it's been a little stop-start. And outside of Zadarius Smith reintroducing himself to Aaron Rodgers in week one, how can the Vikings, I suppose, get with Daniil Hunter and Zed Smith there? They've got incredible talent if Hunter can stay fit. Mm-hmm. Are you surprised that we haven't seen them be more explosive? Because as a Broncos fan, I'm looking at them going, they're equally as good as, say, Randy Gregory and Bradley Chubb.
Right.
But they haven't got. It doesn't feel yet this season that they've gotten up to that level, maybe.
I think the production is less a product of how talented they are, or even how well they're playing, and more a product of the talent of the players around them. Because you take a look at, Bradley Chubb and Randy Gregory, and they have, Pat Surtain behind them, right? And one way for a quarterback to do a good job preventing sacks, preventing pressure, is to get rid of the ball and get rid of the ball quickly. And if you can get rid of the ball quickly, that pressure never arrives. That's not something that people playing the Broncos can always do because of how good that coverage is. The Vikings don't have that, and if a receiver can be open about 1.5, 2 seconds into the snap, the quarterback will get rid of the ball and prevent that pressure from arriving. This was a question that interested me a lot, so I was actually taking a pretty deep look into how Zadarius Smith, how Daniil Hunter were playing, and they're winning a lot at the snap. They're doing a very good job getting past opposing tackles, and it's really on the rest of the team to provide them the support they need in order to generate those sacks, in order to prevent the quarterback from getting rid of the ball. So I actually don't have any concerns about the pass rush as it relates to the players. My concerns about the pass rush are related to everybody else needed to support that group.
Arif, question on the division as a whole. So the Bears have won 2 games somehow, and people are saying they're the
Good
worst
way to
team.
put it.
They're the worst team in football. The Lions haven't watched the summer, in terms of what was being put on in front of our TV screens with Dan Campbell and how eccentric he is and the great camaraderie he has within the camp, and it seems like they are going in the right direction. They might be a year away potentially from really making a strong push. You touched on it earlier, this potentially is a year where the Vikings really could be pushing on to win this division. The Packers in particular, with Devontae Adams leaving, there was always going to be this transition to a different type of offense with different players, and Rodgers trying to spread the ball around to evenly throughout the offense. Are you in that camp that this really is the year for the Vikings to push on? And what is your thoughts right now of this Packers team?
I think that if the Vikings find that consistency, this is the year, right, for them to be able to win the division. I don't know if they'll be able to take advantage of that opportunity, but I think this is the best opportunity they've had in a long time. And part of that has to do, I think, with the Packers. I think there is still a lack of trust that Aaron Rodgers has between him and the other receivers. It's just not unusual. I mean, he's always had some problems with, rookie receivers. He famously had problems with Devontae Adams even before Adams became a really high-level player. And obviously we know that, he didn't trust Christian Watson in that first week after he dropped the ball. I think that the Packers are going to get better, first because he's going to develop that trust, but second, I think now that those 2 tackles are healthy, Elton Jenkins and David Bakhtiari, probably the best pair of tackles in the NFL right now, he's going to have the time he needs to be able to find who he needs to find. Now, that didn't exactly happen against Tampa Bay this week. I mean, he was able to get out to an early lead, but then he didn't score very many more points. And I think that kind of is the kind of game the Packers seem to want to play. They kind of want to win 14-10, 14-6. which is unusual given the talent of their quarterback, but it seems to be what they want to do. And so it's up to other teams to be explosive against them. And that defense is getting better every week. And so while I don't think the Packers are anywhere near as good as they generally are, that we generally consider them to be over the past decade, they're still a very good team. They're still a very powerful team. They're very difficult to beat. And so it's going to take a lot for the Vikings to actually really take advantage of this opportunity and win the division.
I think ultimately winning in Lambeau would be the step, because once they've beaten them at home the last couple of years, they tend to play close in Lambeau, always come out the wrong side of the result.
Yeah, the one time they lost at home, they did win at Lambeau, too, which is pretty interesting. But yeah, they've been able to split the series 1-1, even though the Packers have generally been a better team. And I think that's a good sign of how close these divisional teams play each other. But yeah, if they win at Lambeau, that's going to be huge.
Arif, I had the honour, I think, of going to that Monday night game in Chicago last year with the Bears and Vikings. That was some game. The press box was very quiet. I was gutted because I didn't get to meet you because I know I texted you before and you weren't there. So it was great to have you on the show. But also, folks, for people watching this, if it wasn't for people like yourself, like a retweet or coming on the show, it really means an awful lot to us. So thank you so much for coming on, and obviously continue success with Pro Football Network at Arif Hassan NFL. Follow him, folks, please. But finally, pick for the game. Who's going to win?
Oh boy, the spread is dropped. I think from like 5 to 2.5 or something like that. I think without your starting quarterback, it seems very unlikely that Jameis Winston's going to play. I think without your starting quarterback, it's almost impossible. So I'm going to pick the Vikings to win.
Awesome. Arif, appreciate your time, man. And we'll do this in Minnesota in the freezing cold in December sometime or something. But
oh, fantastic.
Appreciate the time, sir. And folks, obviously, massive thanks to Arif. We'll be back in a couple of minutes with our next guest, Jeff Duncan. Sweet. Oh, sweet. Welcome back into the Irish NFL show. Week 4, Saints against the Vikings. Had to remind myself there for a second, even for it's just been that sort of week. It's been a really, really fun week in London. Been fortunate to be here for a few days now, and fantastic to hear from Arif. Just brilliant, brilliant guest, and it gets even better now. Jeff Duncan from the Times Picayune.
Good.
I got that right.
Excellent.
NOLA.com. Jeff, we've had you on the show numerous times now, but to have you here in person, welcome in, and thank you so much for doing this.
It's a pleasure to be here. Very excited about the game today, but excited to be on with you all. And look, I would be up for coming every year to games over here. I just think it's a great experience. I think every time I come, this is now the third time, it's gotten bigger, and you can tell the enthusiasm. And the Saints have brought a ton of fans. I'm really interested to see how many New Orleanians are in the crowd today.
And it's you're saying it's your third time here. Just wait till you see, there is a significant difference, I think, in that stadium. So it will be good. We were joking off air. You broke the quarterback story this week, and the Saints came in on Monday. They came in very early. For people not aware, they came in on Monday, and I think they're the only team that are coming in that early, which could be a massive benefit for them.
Yeah, they've done that in the past. That was a Sean Payton kind of strategy. They want the body clock adjustment. They feel like it allows them to kind of settle into a better rhythm during the week. And Sean Payton was also very big on sleep patterns, and they had a sleep doctor that they actually had on consultation, and she would always advise them to get in early for a game. So I'm interested to see if it plays out, the fact that the Vikings had a totally different strategy, and a lot of teams have, I think, prefer to come in late. But I think it's something the Saints have always enjoyed, getting over here, getting adjusted. Now we'll see if it pays off on later today.
Jeff, we spoke to Mickey Loomis back in May about the transition to Dennis Allen as head coach, but you have literally written the book about Sean Payton and the Saints. From your perspective, what's been your impression of Dennis and the first 3 weeks of the season thus far?
Good question, and I think it's still evolving, Colin. I mean, I think he kept most of the what I would call structural strategies in place. They very much run practices the same way. The weekly schedule's very similar. I think the culture that was in place was something that Mickey Loomis very much wanted to preserve, and that was all established and built by Sean Payton. And Dennis Allen coached under Sean for all those years, so they're very similar, I think, in a lot of ways, the way they approach the game, the way they think. But there is differences, and that is Dennis Allen, of course, was a defensive coach. And we see most of the differences during the games, the way he calls the game. He's a little more conservative. Last week, for instance, right before halftime, the Saints were in Carolina territory. They were down about the 40-yard line, and he elected to punt instead of trying a longer field goal. He did that against Tampa Bay as well. That's something Sean Payton would have definitely tried to score points because he's an offensive-minded coach. Sean a little more aggressive, a little more of a gunslinger. But other than that, it's been very similar in a lot of ways, and I think that was by design.
And in terms of the defense, Jeff, that hasn't been much of a transition in the sense that he's still calling the plays defensively. From a Saints perspective, in terms of the fans, are they concerned about that offense? You've come to there on the strategy. They're not been as aggressive as we would have seen in the Sean Payton. Because you look at the first 3 games, I felt they got caught on the hop a little bit by the Falcons' offense. And in fairness, Falcons' offense has played quite well throughout the course of the 3 games. Then we saw back in week 2 and week 3 that the defense is going to come back to what we saw last year. Quite dominant. Maybe not getting as many sacks as we're used to, but defensively they look sound. It's this offensive piece. And James Winston, obviously not going to play today. Andy Dalton, what's your overall thoughts right now of this offense? Is it a work in progress with Olave coming in? Michael Thomas obviously is not going to play today. Like, there is variance, and Kamara hasn't been. He obviously missed the game as well. He hasn't been back to what we're used to seeing in terms of his play.
Well, I did think the offense would take a little while to kind of come together, and it's proven to be that. You have a lot of moving parts. You mentioned Chris Olave, Mike Thomas coming back from injury, and obviously the left tackle situation that Trevor Penning was hurt. It looked like he was going to start. So it's not surprising that they've gotten off to a slow start. I'm a little surprised they've been as inefficient or mistake-prone as they've been. A lot of penalties, a lot of pre-snap penalties. We know about the turnovers. Those things I didn't expect to be quite as prolific as they've been. And the defense, as a result, has had to play in, I think, a very unadvantageous position. They've played from behind the whole time, so they can't really get after the quarterback. And that's where the turnovers come and the big plays come, when you can really pin back your ears and come after the quarterback. They've been playing from behind, and that's no way to play in the NFL. And that's also, I think, led to a lot of the problems on offense. It led to a lot of turnovers, led a lot to sacks, and they've got to get that straight. It's a small body of work still. I'm sure you all saw that Tampa Bay game, the Bucs game. That was an interesting game because it almost felt like a tennis match where you had a couple long volley players, and they were just volleying back and forth. Nobody wanted to go for the winner. The quarterbacks were both just not wanting to make a mistake, so we got to the third quarter, it was 3-3. And so that was just a weird game, and I feel like the other two games the Saints have been playing from behind the whole time.
We spoke on the show about that game in particular, and the fight, the trouble, the ban for Evans, it seemed to affect the Saints. We felt it affected the Saints more so than it affected the Bucs at that time, and as the game transpired, obviously the Bucs went on to win 2010. They got that touchdown in the fourth quarter with Brady. Like, did you think that you obviously would be closer to us?
Well, you don't step on Superman's cape, right? I think maybe Tom Brady kind of took control of that game. I just thought that game was going to come down to whoever blinked first, and I think the Saints blinked, and once they did, it kind of snowballed on Jameis Winston made some uncharacteristic mistakes. And I say that because the Jameis Winston we saw before this weekend, looks a lot more like the guy in Tampa Bay that was mistake-prone, that ended up, losing his job. We didn't see that last year. He was very much more under control, avoided mistakes, and I think that's certainly partly attributable to his injury. But this team can't afford that. One thing I think that surprised Saints fans a little bit, maybe everybody, is this team is not going to be – I think we got so used to seeing the Drew Brees, Sean Payton, high-flying offense, scoring 30 or 40 points a game. And Dennis Allen even told me in training camp, he said, we got to get used to winning games 17-14, 21-20. He knew it was going to be a low-scoring team built around the defense, the kicking game, which has been somewhat erratic. But it wasn't good. We're not going to see those days again. That was just a gilded age in Saints football. And this is a different team, and they're going to try and play to those strengths, and they can't afford those offensive mistakes because they're in a different kind of game right now.
Give it like 6 years and wait till Arch Manning comes in, and we could see that happen in the offense.
Wouldn't that be a story? I can't believe you all know about Arch Manning.
I actually met a guy at the Arsenal game yesterday wearing a Manning Saints jersey. I was having a chat with him for a good 20 minutes. He's from New Orleans, and I was telling him you were coming on, and he was delighted. So
that's amazing.
It's just crazy how small the world is. I'm going to go off topic here. We were talking about it a second ago. Andy Dalton starting for the Saints today.
Yeah.
It maybe isn't as much of a key factor now, Jeff, as it might have been 6 or 7 years ago, but Dalton played at Wembley with the Bengals before. He's got experience of playing about 18 quarters because that game went on forever. It was like one of the longest games ever.
Yes.
I mean, it has to be a plus, even if it is negative, that, you fly over here and Winston's not playing. It's definitely different in terms of what the original plan was.
Well, let's hope it doesn't go that long today. As journalists, we all want to get done and get out and enjoy the London nightlife if we can. So let's not hex that game. But look, they brought in Andy Dalton for a reason. This is exactly why they brought him in. He's an accomplished quarterback. He's played in playoff games. He's been to Pro Bowls. He's looked terrific when he's played, even in the preseason and training camp. I think there's a lot of confidence. And I noticed there was a little enthusiasm this week at practice. And I don't think that's any type of indictment of Jameis Winston. I think everyone knows that Winston was playing injured. And he was not the same quarterback. He was a little bit immobile in the pocket. Opposing defenses were coming after him. He couldn't get away. It was just leading to a lot of dysfunction on offense. And I think now they feel like, hey, we've got a proven veteran, a guy that knows this offense. And if Andy Dalton can just avoid mistakes, I think this game's going to be close today because of his ability, and he gets the ball out quick, much like Drew Brees did, and that's how this offense really works, especially with Pete Carmichael calling the plays right now.
Everyone talked about the 2020 receiving class, then the 2021 receiving class, and all of a sudden the 2022 receiving class looks pretty good as well. Saints went and got Chris Olave, and he's really found his feet, particularly in that game against Carolina. He had a huge game despite the loss. How impressed have you been with that young man through the first 3 weeks?
Very impressed with how seamless the transition's been to the next level. I thought there might be a little bit more of a of a ramping up period for him as far as how quickly they would go to him in the offense. I mean, they've started right away from day one going to him. He's really developed a connection with Jameis Winston. It'll be interesting to see if that carries over with Andy Dalton. I expect it will. But he brought an element, Colin, to the offense that they didn't have before. A deep threat, a guy that can run away from defensive backs. As good as Michael Thomas is, he's not a separation guy. He's one of the lowest separation rates in all of the NFL. That's not his game. He's going to catch contested catches. They needed someone that could do what Chris Olave does in this offense, and I think immediately he's shown mentally, too, that he can grasp this Saints offense, which is not easy for receivers. Sometimes I think that's underrated. The way the Saints offense works, I mean, they really ask a lot of the receivers to make a lot of adjustments on the fly, and a lot of receivers struggle, but I do think that's a credit not only to Olave's intelligence, but also to the system they run at Ohio State. A lot of these receivers come out of that program and have impacts on the NFL right away.
Jeff, I was interested to get the fan viewpoints, and I look at the Saints over the last 10 years. Like, there's so many missed opportunities for this team. They really should have won more Super Bowls. You think of 2 Viking games in particular in the playoffs. Then you obviously have the Roby Cohen non-pass interference in the championship game against the Rams. So many difficult losses. Yet you touched on it earlier that you expect to see a huge, considerable amount of fans from the Saints, not only UK and across Europe, but from the States here today. A great loyal supporter who've had some difficult times on and off the field. This fan base are still 100% committed to this team back home, and no matter what's thrown in front of them, they just take it on the chin.
I think the Saints fan base, when I took the job in New Orleans in 2000, I didn't know there was this passionate following for the team. And I know it really kind of hit its peak during the Drew Brees, Sean Payton era, but the Katrina experience of Hurricane Katrina and kind of galvanizing the city, and the team almost became a symbol of the city. And I think it's a unique symbiotic relationship that the Saints have. I mean, they wear the fleur-de-lis as their logo. That's the city symbol. It's just a very provincial area. And that's one of the great things about living in New Orleans. It's very European. Obviously, the history of the French and Spanish rules there. When I come to Europe, I see a lot of things that I go, oh, that's why we have that back in New Orleans. It makes sense to me now. So I think that village type of mentality, the old French village, there's a phrase called esprit de cloche, which means the spirit of the clock tower, the watchtower. You defend your village with all your might, the honor of your village, if you live within hearing distance of the clock tower. Well, that's kind of what New Orleans is like with the Saints. I mean, it's very much a vehement passionate fan support. And they traveled over here. I went to a fan party on Friday night, and they turned that place out. I mean, it was incredible what they did to that bar. I'm not sure it's recovered yet, but
that was a heavy night, was it?
It was fun. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Put it that way. But yes, but it was. The Saints fans here are going to stick with them through thick and thin. I do think that period you talk about, those Super Bowl misses.
Yeah.
I think we're all going to look back on that with time as we get further away from it and realize how great those teams were and how unfortunate they were that they didn't win more. And I'll just say this last thing. You brought up the Vikings games. I still think that Vikings loss on the Minnesota Miracle is one of the most remarkable. It should have been one of the crowning achievements of the Sean Payton, Drew Brees era. That was a great Vikings team. They led the NFL in defense that year. They were dominating that game. If y'all have ever been to a game at that stadium, it's incredibly loud. It's a hostile environment. And they went in there and turned that game around the second half. And really, Drew Brees, I've always argued that he's underrated to some degree because that should have been a Drew Brees victory. I mean, he drove them and got the game-winning field goal with 27 seconds left, I think, and they still couldn't hold it. Because of the kind of crazy end of that game. And that should have been a crowning achievement. I think they would have gone on and given Philadelphia a much better game. And same thing with the Saints against the Rams when they lost that game because of the controversial call. I think they would have played the Patriots in the Super Bowl much better. I think Sean McVay learned a lot from that game, but he was not prepared for that moment. I think he out-psyched himself against Bill Belichick.
Definitely a Super Bowl to forget, even for the fans. Half the time it was that bad.
I was at that when it was pretty
It
boring.
was rough. I imagine watching it at 4 in the morning. It's good fun. The national anthems are just going on behind us at the moment. If you do hear people singing, it's not me or Brian or Colin or maybe Mark Cockerell or Hogan or anybody. Just a quick fire final round here. Talking Vikings, we've had Kevin O'Connell on over a couple of months ago, and it's obviously a new era there. What are your thoughts on that team today? Like, do you feel like they're in a better position now than they were last year in terms of Zimmer's not there anymore, or what's your overall thoughts on this team?
Yeah, I'm very excited to see them play under O'Connell. I heard a lot of good things about him around the league from my sources. He's very well regarded, and I think they needed a change there. I have a lot of respect for Mike Zimmer, but it felt like it was getting stale, and that happens sometimes. You need a new voice, and he feels like he's breathed some life into that. I'm eager to see how they play today, if they're much different. But it's going to be a big challenge for the Saints. They've got some great players on defense. Danielle Hunter is a guy I know very, very well. Saints fans know him from LSU days. Same thing with Patrick Peterson. So this will be a challenge for them. I think having an experienced backup like Dalton is key. I don't think you want to play against the Vikings defense like this. I know they haven't played that well this year, but they've got talent over there, and it probably, again, the small body of work kind of skews some of the numbers right now.
Obviously, you talked earlier about like that Sean Payton, Drew Brees era, 30, 40 points were regular. But part of that was the complementary running piece. The Saints were always had Alvin Kamara, and you think this year it's struggled. Is that down to his injuries? Is that down to the O-line? What do you think, I suppose, is the factor that the running game maybe hasn't been exactly what we would expect from the Saints?
Good question. Also, I think it's a little skewed. They've been playing from behind. I think we saw the fourth quarter numbers. They've only had 2 runs in all 3 fourth quarters combined. So they're not getting the numbers because they're playing catch-up, throwing the ball. Their actual numbers are pretty good. I think they're averaging 5.5 yards a carry. So in the early part of the game, they're running the ball pretty effectively, but they've fallen behind the second half, and they're abandoning the running game. So I think that's still a little early to make the judgment. But obviously Alvin missed the second game of the season with a rib injury. He's a dynamic player. He has to have a big game today. I mean, they can't get around it. He has to produce in the passing game and in the running game. And that's something that he and Jameis Winston, for whatever reason, didn't have a great connection in the passing game, something Drew Brees certainly exploited. It'd be interesting to see today if Andy Dalton hooks up with him, because he's a weapon, as you all know, out on the perimeter.
Jeff, appreciate it's still early in the season, but the division feels like it's there for the Saints. In a way, we've seen a very mixed start from the Bucs. There's a lot of mixed opinions whether Brady is fully committed to the season. Is his play tailed off, or is it more so the injuries in which the Bucs offense is dealing with? The Falcons have surprised people in terms of how explosive they are with Mariota as quarterback, and Matt Rule, despite last week's victory, is still under pressure there. So it seems like this year, if any year, the Saints haven't come so close in Week 17 to make the playoffs that they could potentially push on them.
Yeah, I thought that they would be the main challenger to Tampa Bay, and I still feel like that could happen. I mean, the Saints have a talented roster. They've got to get their house in order. I mean, they don't need to worry about anybody else right now but their own self-inflicted wounds. These are things that just have not happened with this team in the past. I think Dennis Allen's been surprised by it, but I feel like they have enough talent on both sides of the ball. I mean, there are very few weaknesses on this team overall when you look at it on paper, but they have not played well. I mean, there's no getting around that. But I think they feel like if they can get through this, I mean, we've seen teams throughout history here start 1-4 and make the playoffs, 1-5. It can happen, but this team's got to play a lot better, and it probably starts today. I think if anything, result notwithstanding, they just need to play better. And if they lose, at least they'll feel better about themselves, because they haven't played well enough so far in any game, I think, to feel good leaving the stadium.
And just finally, Jeff, your pick for today. Arif Hassan went with the Vikings, not surprisingly. I'm presuming you're going to go to Saints?
Well, I picked the Saints, and we were driving over in the car today to the stadium, and I said, I feel like a homer. I actually don't know if they're going to win this game or not. I do think, here's what I think could happen today. I think the defense, we talked earlier, they haven't really had a real marquee game yet. This is the game they can do it. They can get after Kirk Cousins. He's not very mobile. Yeah. The Saints use that pressure with just 4 men. They're very big and physical up front. If they can start collapsing that pocket, getting him moving around, maybe they get some turnovers, maybe a takeaway that leads to points, short field for Andy Dalton. If they can play with the lead and use Kamara, I think that's the recipe. The defense has to play well. Alvin Kamara has to play well. And I think they can sneak out and get back to the United States with 2-2, which would be huge for them with Seattle next week.
Jeff, for anybody who hasn't placed a bet on the game that's watching the show this morning, you're doing a great job of selling it to them of how the Saints are going to win this game.
Yeah, what's the betting line? Two
Two and a half, isn't it? I think the handicap is.
It went up to 3.5 last night, so there's a hook there.
With Andy Dalton, right? Yeah, I would take the Saints, but don't come to me complaining if they lose.
18 plus, gamble responsibly. It's Sunday morning. Jeff, you've been on the broadcast numerous times now, but genuinely thanks so much for coming on today, but also for your support over the last 2 or 3 years. It's unreal, and I hope you enjoyed the game today, man.
Yeah, it's a pleasure coming on. Thanks for inviting me, and as if with my Scotch lineage, I appreciate you all having me on. I want to get back to the home country at some point in my life, so I appreciate it.
Well, definitely hit us up if you do. I'll take you up around the north as well, and we'll get some Scots in you as well. And
Beautiful.
See
Let's
the
do it.
Thanks, man. We'll be back in a couple of minutes with discussion on the game picks, and more. Thanks for sticking with us. Hey, Kajay Tatu, Falcha Gadi. Wow, the wind. We've got really lucky this morning with this wind. And can I just first off thank everyone at Shark Productions, including Sean and the team here, for their help this morning, because at one point I came up here at like 8 o'clock and I thought, I never told the team this, but I thought it's going to rain here, lads. It's definitely going to rain, and we've got away with it, so we'll get on with this before, in case it does rain. It's definitely going to rain during the game, isn't it? It definitely is.
Feels like it might well do.
Let's get our picks in for the game. Minnesota going up against New Orleans in London. Game at 2:30 Ireland, the UK, 9:30 a.m. Eastern, 6:30 a.m. Pacific. Very quickly, if anyone's on the flight tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m. to Belfast, give me a wee shout. There's already 4 or 5 lads that have DM'd me. We're going to have the crack tomorrow morning. Talking about the crack today, who's going to win this game, Colin?
Well, look, the major, I think, thing is the Saints have a huge number of injuries when you consider and not having your starting QB, not having your WR1, and some injuries in the defense as well. But also the fact that we know what Kirk Cousins is like under lights, right? He's terrible. Well, now he gets to play this, whereas it'll be what, like 8:30 in the morning.
Well, it is. But it is under lights to an extent, because it's on NFL Network. It's a national game, and obviously for people watching this that aren't aware, in the States you only get to see your home market team unless it's Sunday Night Football or something. So it is sort of under lights, and it's not.
No, I think given the timing, we know it's nighttime. it's when it's dark that Kirk Cousins just can't seem to function. Look, it's a shame Jameis is out and that the Saints have the injuries that they do, because you'd obviously love to see teams at full strength. But because of that and where the Vikings are, I'm going to say the Vikings get a win, and I'm hoping we see a big game from Justin Jefferson.
Me too. Brian, who have you got in this game, mate?
Oh, it's a tough one. It's been a tough one all week. We've been back and forth, and it's reflective in the line for the game. It's so close. And Jeff made some valid points around this Saints defence. He's looking to see a performance where they put Kirk Cousins under pressure. And when Kirk Cousins is put under pressure, he tends to make very erratic mistakes, interceptions, fumbles, and he struggles. But I struggle to see how this offence for the Saints can do a lot without key players. And Kamara hasn't looked himself this year. He has been injured. He's also missed a game. And Andy Dalton is going to have to play a perfect game. Let's be honest. If it gets into a back and forward, high scoring game, I can't see. The Saints have been very aggressive in the past and can put up a lot of points. They don't seem, Jeff has touched on, they don't seem to be that type of team now. They're more of a low scoring team, and they're reliant on a defence to do a lot of the work for them. They've been playing from behind in quite a lot of games this year, which hasn't helped. I'm with Colin, I'm going to lean Vikings, but I always think of what Mark Cockrell always says: when you think about picking the Vikings, don't. But I am going to pick the Vikings this week. I think with Jefferson, Thielen, Cook playing, having looked for large parts of the week that he may not play, they've got enough players there, and defensively they've been up and down, but I can see a performance for today, so I'll go with the Vikings.
Something smells really good. Don't know what it is. Anyway, people on the podcast, sorry about that.
You're smelling nice.
There's a tailgate going on the other side of this building. I think that's what it is. Mark, who are you picking? Mark's not here. Where is Mark actually right enough? Like where is he?
In New York.
He's in New York. He's a big Jets fan. Mark is going with the Vikings, and so that means 3. Even Mark Hogan's going with the Vikings. So if I pick the Saints, I'm a bad man. The reality is, I've got all my stats here, as you can see, Colin. Kirk Cousins has thrown 5 touchdowns so far this season in 3 games, but he's also thrown 3 picks. He's the most up and down quarterback in the league. He's like Marmite. You either love him or hate him. I think the Vikings ball out today. I think the combination of the run game and Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen is going to be too much for the Saints, and I think this is going to be a blowout. I think the Vikings are going to win 34-10, and I hope, believe me, as somebody that's not at home at the minute and wants nothing more than a bit of soda bread and a cup of tea, I hope that this game's good. I just have a feeling it's going to be a blowout, and look, hopefully it's tight, but I just see the Vikings running away with this. I think their defence will come up against Andy Dalton. The only thing, and we said it to Jeff there now, Andy Dalton's played in London before. That doesn't matter anymore. Back 6-7 years ago, it was a factor when teams were coming over once a year. Now they come over bazillion times a year. It doesn't even matter. But I guess for Dalton, he's always going to be prepared to play as a backup, but there's no way he would have got on that plane thinking he's going to start. So yeah, I'm going with the Vikings. It's a home run on the Vikings. Everyone's going for the Vikings.
Well, the thing is for Andy Dalton, he's been with the Cowboys last year. He He came in when Dak Prescott had an injury. He's back in the same scenario today where Winston's not available. He's a quarterback that is highly sought after in free agency by teams because he is that player that can come in and give you a game or two in terms of going in and winning a game. Consistency, can he do it throughout the course of the season? Probably not. But for the likes of today, I don't really read too much into the fact that he played in Wembley all those years ago. It's a different stadium, it's a different time, it's a different team, different coaches. It's more about if this Saints team can find the level of urgency that is required, because they have to recognise that if they lose today, whilst they're 1-3 and it's still early in the season, they're in a difficult division with a team that should be challenging to go to the Super Bowl in the books.
Colin, have you any final words? I know Brian has snuck Barry's tea bags in, so that's a pro so far for the game.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, if you're a Saints fan and you're looking for hope, the fact that we have unanimously picked the Vikings should give you a lot of optimism. Generally, when we pick across the board, it turns out to be a disaster for us. So maybe the Saints will sneak it.
Well, picking across the board worked on Thursday night for everyone. Right enough, I should have went with the Saints, shouldn't I, for that? But no, obviously looking forward to it. If you are attending the game today, enjoy it. I'll be out around the front. If you do see me, give me a shout. And I'm sure these lads will be going for a dander for some social content at some point as well. Big thanks to everyone that set this up today. Just very quick, have you any final points before I wrap this up? Are you okay? All good?
No, I suppose this is the first of many. We're back here again, same place next week.
Well, next week's going to be nuts.
Another pack show. In fact, I think we have 4 guests next week.
Well,
Packers Giants next week. Who's looking forward to that one?
It's going to be a mad game next week. I can't wait for next week. It's going to be a great Sunday. But it's going to be a great game today as well. And obviously it's great to have the NFL back close to home. And if you see us, whether it's today in the airport later on, give us a shout. Brian's buying pints. And just a big thanks to the team here, Sean and the team, just for all their help. Not just last year, but this year as well. It's really went up a gear this year. And thanks to LAE for such a fantastic venue. And thanks for not raining, folks. It's really meant an awful lot. We will be back tomorrow night at 9 o'clock to recap London, to recap the week. If you want to get caught up on today's games, and the podcast is up now, go on YouTube for the Sunday preview. And this is also on YouTube immediately, so you can check it out if you're only waking up or if you're heading to the chapel or something. So enjoy it. We'll see you tomorrow. And thanks again, folks. Have a great day. Enjoy the game.
Thank you.